Welcome back to Season 3, Episode 5 of Life Beyond Loss, the podcast. This is a guest show where we share amazing and inspiring stories of how people are navigating grief and loss through to healing and transformation. I'm your host, Louise Kresick, grief and loss coach, and today I'm talking to Maxine Cook. She is a psychologist and she's a sleep disorder treatment specialist, and it's been amazing to be able to have Maxine on the show. This came as a specific request from one of our community members who wanted to know more about how to deal with sleep deprivation and getting enough quality sleep during difficult times in their life. And so in this interview, it's really, really super helpful. We talk about, what good quality sleep actually means and what we need. But also Maxine explains how, what happens during times of grief and significant life changes and why our sleep is affected so much. She also talks about her own story, losing her parents and having experienced some hormonal disruption and the impact this had on her health. And we talk really, really interestingly about the role of mainstream medicine and how this could really help alongside complementary therapies. Of course, there's the usual tips as well. And this is a really fascinating episode, so stay tuned. Today's show by Maxine Cook, who is a psychologist and sleep disorder treatment specialist, and feel very privileged to have kind of found Maxine and come across Maxine, because I know the listeners have talked quite often about sleep and how it affects them around grief and loss. And Maxine, I'm so glad I found you, because I've been looking for an expert for quite some time, so welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
So why don't we just start off by just sharing a little bit actually about what a sleep disorder treatment specialist does.
Right. Well, there's a lot of different factors that contribute to people not sleeping well. There's different types of insomnia that affect different people in different ways at different times and for different reasons. So it's a case really of identifying exactly what someone is struggling with and what the underlying causes of that might be. And sometimes it's hormonal, sometimes it's lifestyle, sometimes it's a brainwave misalignment which doesn't enable people to go down to the baseline level of sleep they're supposed to go to, or circadian rhythms are out of whack. It could be a combination of several of those factors, if not all of them. And I tend to see people who've had sleep problems for a long time, who have perhaps been self-medicating in different ways, some of which are not appropriate, and their sleep problem has become habitual and not possible for them to fix by themselves.
Perfect description. I've got it. And there's a lot about this to understand, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned kind of, rhythms and things like that, and it just kind of obviously flows off the tongue because you're so used to it. But actually, there's a general lack of understanding, I think, for the average person like me about what actually is involved in sleep and, how that can affect quality of sleep and so on.
Right. Well, as walking little miracles of science, we are programmed biologically to go to a certain level of sleep, which I call the theta wave level of sleep, where our organs, including our brain, have the chance to rest and recuperate and regenerate to allow us to wake up with some energy to be able to get through the day. And for a lot of people, that's just not happening because life gets in the way, we get stressed, we get busy, and we're just not kind of getting to that level. And it's starting to have a very, very big impact on the lives and the lifespan of far too many people.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's so do you think like the way in which we function now, like society in general, is having that impact? It's change of lifestyle or maybe increasing stress? I don't know.
It's a combination of factors. We are a lot more stressed just in the course of our daily lives, but diet is also a big factor, what we're eating, things like the time of day that we're eating. It's all really, a lot of it goes back to the changes we've had to make in order to just live what now is classed as a normal life.
And obviously most of the clients that I work with are in the midst of grief and have experienced some kind of loss, and this seems to be a common thing that they struggle with. It's being able to get to sleep, get enough sleep. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's mainly when people are grieving or suffering or coming to terms with a major traumatic event like a loss, and it might not necessarily even be a bereavement. It could be just a major life change like the loss of a marriage or a relationship, the loss of a home. It's all to do with the hormonal fluctuations that occur, because when we're under stress, different neurotransmitters, different brain chemicals kick in that interfere with what we call a homeostasis, which is the body's baseline level of optimal functioning. And a lot of things can go out of kilter. And it's basically, it's no one's fault. And trying to say to someone, "I'll snap out of it, time heals all wounds," blah, blah, all of these platitudes aren't going to help, because there is actually a biological cocktail of dysfunction going on that needs to be looked at and readdressed. So it's a normal biological response to an overloading stressful event.
And I hope you don't mind me asking you this, but I just wondered whether you'd had any personal experience of this kind of thing, and your experiences of sleep and how that might have been affected you.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I look, I'm 59, so when I look back on my life, there's lots and lots and lots of loss. But the biggest one that's impacted me for my entire life is the loss of my nuclear family, my parents, in terms of the relationships that we had. My family was very dysfunctional. There was violence, there was drinking, all sorts of things. And I guess I just grew up grieving what I hadn't had and what I thought I should have had as a child. And that's carried through all my life. I've had hormonal disruption all my life. I'm also grieving the loss of, I was grieving the loss of my health. And consequently, everything that I have had to come to terms with has impacted on me very keenly because of that first primary, long-standing sense of loss of, feeling secure and feeling loved and wanted, and all of those things that just weren't there. And you get to a point where you know that they should be and you know that they're not, but it's how you manage that. And for too many people, managing loss is something that they don't get much help with. It's something that a lot of people find it hard to talk about, and I couldn't talk about it for decades actually. And it ultimately culminated in me losing my health about 4 years ago. I was being treated for all kinds of things. I was on all kinds of medications. The doctors just didn't know what was wrong with me. They weren't linking symptoms. And ultimately, I woke up in a hotel room in Ireland on holiday with my husband, and I felt so rough. I thought, I'm not going to survive another year. My weight had increased. My blood pressure had gone through the roof. Everything was just getting worse and worse, and all the doctors were doing was throwing more drugs at me to just manage me rather than get to the root cause of what was wrong. So I ultimately went to see an alternative practitioner, kinesiologist, who diagnosed me with a long-standing gluten intolerance of all things.
Wow.
So it was at a critical stage where all my organs were failing. My body just wasn't coping with it, and I was literally dying on my feet. So that turned my life around, and what it taught me was that I had a big message and a lot of compassion for dealing with people who were going through the same thing. Mainstream medical practice is failing a lot of people, and they're really frustrated. They're at their wits' end. They don't want to be taking drugs. There needs to be another way. So I went back and retrained in all these different therapies so that I could help people before they got to the stage that I got to, when my life was literally in the balance.
Wow, that's quite a story.
There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the nutshell version.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? And because I was recently on some mental health first aid training, and we talked about how, at the moment there's tendency to want to medicalise everything when it's like happening on an emotional level. So you go to the doctors, and obviously they try to use some kind of tick list or put it into a box of some kind, and like you say, then the prescription comes out, and it's it's really odd that we haven't moved forward as a society in dealing and approaching these things differently.
Well, I think now, because the NHS is so overburdened and under-resourced, that this is like a management policy. It's a blanket management policy of keeping people at a certain level so that they don't get any worse, but the resources are diminishing really quickly in terms of being able to actually fix people. And until mainstream medicine acknowledges the efficacy of complementary therapies, then we're not going to change anything, because complementary therapies have been around for thousands of years and they've worked for all that time. But the advent of the drug boom, we forgot about those, but they're still an option, and they're a really good option because they do work. And we just need to kind of start going back to some of that, because different things work for different people. There is no one size fits all. Some people will do okay on a sleeping tablet for a while. Others, it will just mess with their heads and create more problems. There's no one approach that's going to suit everybody, and that's why the work that I do is so important, because it's tailored to the individual. We look at individual circumstances and we put the appropriate interventions in place to help get things back on track, because sleep is the fundamental cornerstone of well-being, particularly for people who are grieving, because if they're not sleeping, that's a hormonal block to getting down to that baseline level, and that they're just feeling wretched. They're not coming to terms with the grief at all. They're just feeling worse and worse. And if we can fix the sleep, that's the cornerstone of beginning to fix everything else that's wrong.
Absolutely. It's just so, like, people underestimate how vital sleep is, don't they? With everything else that's going on, that lack of sleep, I think, really is a big contributing factor to...
It's the most important thing to get right, no matter what's going on. But for people who are grieving, people who are dealing with a high level of stress, that time for adequate rest and rejuvenation is critical to the brain and to organ function.
So how did, and we'll come back to that in a minute, because I'm really interested to see, how we kind of approach that, how we deal with it then. But how did you sort of navigate your own recovery?
Well, I realised fairly early on that my sleep was majorly disrupted, and in the course of my training that I'd done many, many years ago, I knew how important sleep was. So for me, I had to do a lot of stuff, because also menopause is another big thing that messed with all my hormones and stopped me from sleeping. I had to reset everything, my brainwave patterning, my circadian rhythms. I had to look at various different lifestyle factors, how I was sabotaging my own sleep without realising we're doing that. And, all of us do that. We don't realise what we're creating in terms of barriers for ourselves just in the way that we live, and make some major adjustments to how I, what time of the night I ate my food, when I had my last cup of coffee, all kinds of different things, and not medicating, trying to use alcohol as a sleep promoter, because that really is catastrophic. That doesn't work, and most people don't understand the science behind that. But it's just kind of looking at what I needed to do, what my body and my brain needed in terms of support to get me through that phase and back to a place where I could sleep well. And I went from having 10 hours sleep a night and waking up feeling like I'd had 2 to getting like 7 hours and waking up feeling like I'd had 10. So it's all about the quality, and there is so much that we can do to help ourselves with our sleep. And it's surprisingly easy to correct a sleep imbalance as long as we know what we're dealing with, and as long as the commitment is there to making it changed.
So how much sleep do we actually need? Is there like a set amount, or is it a case of it's different for, like you said, different people respond?
Yeah, well, it is different for different people, and it also depends on what they're dealing with in their lives. People dealing with stress or grief or loss are going to need more sleep, because their bodies have been knocked around by hormones, neurotransmitters, dysfunctional patterns of eating, and other things that they've fallen into, and in response to that stress are going to need more sleep. People whose lives are fairly well settled and there isn't too much to be dealing with day to day, they probably need a little bit less. But as a benchmark, 7.5 to 8 hours sleep a night is what we should all be aiming for. But it's about the quality more than the quantity, really.
So how can you tell if you're actually having quality sleep?
Well, if you're having quality sleep, you're waking up feeling like you've got some energy to get through the day. You're waking feeling like you would want to feel, not stressed or in pain, or unable to concentrate on anything, just feeling like you want to feel, with energy and enthusiasm for the day, and not feeling the urge to kind of fall asleep mid-afternoon is a big factor for most people, actually, because the digestive process is kicking in about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and that's why we all want to curl up in a little ball under our table and go to sleep. But yeah, so
yeah, I have to say, one of the ways I've seemed to have managed that is my diet. So I noticed that when I ate things like bread for lunch, it was making me feel quite lethargic.
Yeah, because the body's got to work that much harder to digest those complex carbohydrates.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like you say, it's looking at this as a whole, isn't it? Really,
it is. The piecemeal approach doesn't work. You could say, oh well, I take these herbal teas because they help, but if that's all you're doing, that's only addressing the symptom of the sleeplessness. So it's about getting to the bottom of it. And you're right. You're absolutely right, Louise. It's a holistic approach that's needed. You've got to attack it from all fronts, for want of a better term. But getting everything sorted at the same time is the best way forward in terms of fixing sleep and keeping it fixed.
So just very briefly then, I think it would be good if you could just perhaps walk us through. So if I came to you as a potential client, I just maybe experienced grief, I felt like I wasn't sleeping very well, had a few hours, where would you start, and what would be like the journey that you'd perhaps walk me through?
Well, with all my clients, we start with a very comprehensive assessment, which takes about an hour and a half. It looks at lifestyle, it looks at environmental factors and biological medical factors. So it's a full history of where you've come from, how you've got to where you are, and how life is looking for you at the moment. And then we talk about what symptoms you've got, how your body is responding, what your skin is like, because that's a big barometer of what's going on hormonally as well. So there's a very comprehensive assessment, and then we determine what your issues are specifically. Like if you're falling asleep really easily but having trouble staying asleep, that to me talks of like brainwave reset patterning, where you're not getting down to that baseline level of sleep that you're supposed to go to, where you'll stay there. But if you're waking up in pain or you've got inflammation, that's a different issue. So it's really just dependent on what you present with and what your symptoms are, and also your emotional state, how you're feeling about it, in terms of how quickly we can make things better and turn everything around. So it's always very individual for individual people. The assessment process identifies the different issues that people are facing and the different ways in which they're either supporting themselves or sabotaging themselves, and we pretty much take it forward from there, because there's a range of interventions that can be used, but a lot of it too, I mean, that's why it's psychology as well as sleep disorder treatment, because a lot of it is cognitive. A lot of cognitive changes need to be made, just reframing, and it's never anything major, Louise. It's never like a huge overhaul of your lifestyle. It's basically just tweaks and rebalances of the things that you're doing or the things that you're thinking to kind of get you into a better place where the treatment's likely to work.
Fantastic. I love that, like the little tweaks, and it's just so true, isn't it? I suppose it's just it doesn't necessarily mean that this is like, we have to go like really deep into the, certain situations. It's just about addressing those minor things and getting things into balance, I guess, isn't it?
Well, I'll just give you a quick example. One of my clients was he came to me because he hadn't been sleeping. He'd been on Zopiclone for a couple of years. One of the most significant things that was wrong in his life was that he was eating too late at night. He was having his evening meal about 10 o'clock at night and then expecting to go to sleep and rest, when really what he was asking his body to do was work half the night to digest his food. So he was waking up feeling exhausted, in pain. And so we just modified his eating and brought him back to 7:30 in the evening. And that by itself was a huge potential change. But he did that, and it made a huge amount of difference. Just that one thing. And there were other things, of course. It wasn't that simple, but that was a major positive outcome from a minor change. And sometimes it is that simple.
Yeah, and it's so easy, I think, for lots of people to fall into habits like that, isn't it? I think without even really realising the impact.
Yeah, It's people that gives their brains the wrong signals about what bed is for. People will go to bed and read. People will go to bed and play on their phones or their laptops or watch TV, and that's telling the brain that that bed's not sleep. So it's basically, a lot of it is just habits. It's habitual behaviours that have become, our normal, which we don't realise are having such a huge impact on our ability to get the rest we need to lead better lives. And long-term sleep dysfunction, long-term sleeplessness literally does shorten the lifespan.
Guilty of the phone, guilty.
Oh, stop. Give yourself half an hour.
Yeah. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I've also I have known people, and I say people. One of the person I know of is only the same as me, and that they could actually just fall asleep kind of like fairly easily. And I feel that sleep's something I kind of do okay with. But that going on the phone and putting into my gratitude app, I'm almost like falling asleep. It's almost like a sort of a calming behavior, but whether that's because of the fact that I actually have anxiety, so it's kind of maybe having a sort of slightly different effect. And like you say, different things affect people in different ways, don't they? So it's
they do. And the fact that you're falling asleep quickly after doing that doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting down to that baseline level of sleep, because the brain, as sophisticated as the brain is, it creates habits for us that we didn't ask it to. Like, for example, if you have had to wake up early for a couple of mornings, earlier than usual, and then you find that you're just doing that when you don't need to, that can be incredibly frustrating. But as sophisticated as the brain actually is, it really isn't that great at identifying exactly what we need. And if we've gone out of that whole circadian rhythm, brainwave repatterning habit of good quality sleep, then we actually have to retrain the brain to do that. But the great news is that within 66 days or so, the brain has learned a new habit and dumped an old one. So it's easy to fix. And for you going to sleep, your sleep is probably okay, but maybe you're not getting down to that baseline level, because what blue lights do is interfere with the neurotransmitters. And when I describe it to clients, it's like standing on a diving board and looking into the water, and it looks fine, but you dive into the water and you hit a concrete block, because that concrete block is the barrier between your wakefulness and a baseline normal level of sleep, but it's the block that stops you from going down to that rejuvenative theta wave.
Oh, I see. So do you think so you can get there's lots of digital products now, isn't there, that people wear as well? Do you think they're kind of accurate? Do you think they will help people to understand their quality of sleep?
Well, I think some things are helpful, but only up to a point. I think, if you're talking about electronic stuff that people wear, that it actually has its own vibrational frequency. Everything is matter and everything has a frequency. So there's still, I guess the jury's still out on what impact those particular frequencies have on your brainwave frequencies. So it's a difficult question to answer without seeing any research, results of research. And I think in some ways it's great to have that information, and it's great to have that. It's like things like the Fitbits that people wear. I think they are helpful, but I'm not really sure whether or not we're in full control of our own decisions with that stuff, because sometimes it's not particularly accurate, and sometimes it can scare us, sometimes it can falsely reassure us. So it's got its place, but I think in terms of reliance on it, I think that's a dangerous place to be. Blind faith with anything is never a good place to be.
Yeah, I agree. I did see quite a funny comedy sketch once on Facebook that was a group of women, and they were sort of like, are you coming out for a drink? And she's like, oh no, my Fitbit says I can't. So it's like that like over-reliance.
Because it's like sat-navs now. I mean, research is coming out now to say that a certain part of our reasoning and logic within our brain is actually shrinking, because we're not figuring things out anymore. We're just being told what to do. So our capacity for learning new things and finding our way in the world is diminishing, which is a bit of a worry.
Yeah. So what, I know you said that this is, very much a holistic approach and it depends very much on what people need, but do you have any kind of like, basic tips, things that, we should all maybe be thinking about when it comes to getting quality sleep and getting enough sleep?
Absolutely. Sleep hygiene is really important, and that's the term given to the situation around how you sleep. It's not just about cleanliness, it's about habits. And I think for most people, going to bed and getting up at the same time of day each day, even on the weekends, is really important. So if they set themselves a normal pattern of rest, for me it's sort of 10:30 till 7:30, so that's 9 hours. But and there's a little, you can have a little bit of leeway in that. But if even on the weekend, the temptation to sleep late is not helpful to circadian rhythm. So getting up at the same time of day, going to bed at the same time of the evening, having a bedtime ritual, and this is really important for people who are struggling to drop off. Having a bedtime ritual where you spend, say, half an hour getting ready for bed, preparing for bed, putting on some nice nightwear and washing your face, putting a nice cream on, making sure you've done your hair, all of those things that make you feel good about yourself, to go to bed feeling positive. Take the TV out of the bedroom. If you need to read before bed to fall asleep, and a lot of people do that in your living room. Sit in a comfortable chair and read until you feel sleepy, and then go to bed, because that tells the brain that when you're going to bed, you're going there to sleep. And that's a really important thing for the brain to acknowledge and work with. Don't eat too late at night. Don't eat spicy food late at night, especially. Avoid alcohol at least 3 hours before bedtime, because that's another concrete block in the water, believe it or not. And just basically just observing a normal pattern of bedtime routine, and making sure your room is ventilated, it's not too hot or too cold, making sure that your sheets and your blankets or duvet are comfortable for you and not too heavy or not heavy enough, making sure that your room is as dark as it needs to be, because the brain releases melatonin at nightfall, which is the hormone that prepares us for sleep. This is a hormone that's severely compromised when other raging hormones around grief and loss start to come into play. It short circuits that melatonin's ability. So keeping your room as dark and as well ventilated and as comfortable as you can, they're all really important things that most people do. And also levels of hydration. You don't have to drink a bucket load of water before you go to bed, but keep some water by the bed. And if you do wake in the night, just take a few sips, because we need a lot more water than we think we do for our organ function to be working at its optimal level while we're sleeping, because the organs are still busy, while we're sleeping, doing different things, and we need to just support them the best way possible so that we're not waking up feeling hydrated or in pain with inflammation through dehydration, which is a big factor for a lot of people. They kind of wake up feeling like they've been hit by a truck, and that's generally, barring other medical conditions that are coming into play, that is generally a dehydration issue.
Fantastic. That was jam-packed full of tips and loads of fantastic.
We have to play it back a few times to hear it all, but
yeah.
Essentially habits play a huge part in how well people sleep or not.
Yes, definitely. And like you say, it's all about, I guess, sending the right signals to the brain in preparation for sleep as well, isn't it? And also creating the right conditions as well. I did see another funny meme, not that I spend my life looking at memes on Facebook, but there was one about two types of people, and the one that kind of just could like sleep on a washing line or whatever, or fall asleep, which is me, and then the one that has to have like the perfect conditions, which is my husband. So you have to have the right amount of darkness, the right amount of temperature, all of those conditions. It just kind of made me chuckle.
Well, my husband was like that too, and he's still a very light sleeper, but I've worked on him a bit, and I'm continuing to do that. He's a work in progress, but he's getting there. But I mean, most of us can overcome the external variables. It's just a case of knowing what to do to support ourselves. And a lot of people find it's helpful if there's external noise, just sleep with some foam earplugs that don't hurt the ears, and that can make a big difference too, especially in times of trauma and loss, where people are sort of hyper vulnerable, and they just need to be able to blot out some of that external noise that otherwise would just stop them from falling asleep or staying there.
Yeah. Well, I think this has been fantastic, Maxine, and obviously we need to tell people where they can find you as well, because in case they want to come and, you know, seek you out and get some advice and so on.
Right, well, my website is maxinecook.com, and on there people can find a lot of information about my backstory, about my ethos and my beliefs around what I do. And there's a dedicated page there to sleep that people can read, and they can contact me through the website.
And you are, I think you're on Facebook, aren't you? Yeah,
I am. Maxine Cook, Sleep Health Power.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on, Maxine. It's been really, really helpful. And there's loads of stuff there for people that's going to help them. So, yeah, really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for having me, Louise. It's been lovely.